It's either a hell yes or it's a hell no. And if you say yes to something that's really a no, you experience what I call a consent and resent experience. You say yes, and then you resent yourself for having done it, and you resent the other person quite possibly for the invitation in and of itself. And the other person was just saying, do you want to do this thing? And you really don't want to, but you want to be nice, or you think you should, or blah, 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 blah. And the ability to say no, sometimes the biggest no, I'm sorry, I'll say it again. Sometimes the biggest yes you can give yourself is a no to someone else.
Okay, welcome fellow entrepreneurs and goal-getters to Entrepreneurial Elevation, Unleashing Greatness Within, with myself, your host, Kelley Beveridge, and my guest today, Adam Dorsay. And I'm really excited to have him here. And Adam, I apologize. Is it Dorsay
it's
or
Dorsay?
Dorsay?
Kind of like the museum in France.
I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. So Dorsay, and I was just chatting with him. He's just such a cool guy already. I connect to him. He's a licensed psychologist. He offers psychotherapy and coaching services. He has been on the TED Talk stage a few times. He has an award-winning psychology podcast called Super Psyched. I was listening to his episodes earlier. Just a super personable guy. And he's here today to promote his book called Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love. He's also married, got 2 kiddos. And I like to right away when I saw in your bio, you said Australian Labradoodle. Your dog made your bio. I was like, oh, this guy, I like him already. He's a dog guy. Speaking of the power of connection.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome.
Right on,
welcome,
Kelley.
Adam.
So good to be with you. And you immediately, speaking of connection, you immediately just connected so strongly with me. So you've got the stuff.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I'm excited to have you on and to learn from you and to learn from an expert and somebody who has spent thousands and thousands of hours with others learning about people and humans. And so my first question, I just want to dive in, Adam, and I'm curious because I believe you've had over 20,000 hours of intensive psychotherapy with other people. And out of all the things that you could have written a book about, you decided to write one about the power of connection. And so why did you choose that out of everything that you
I'm
could
so
have
glad. Yeah,
chosen?
the 20,000 hours really taught me that the thing that people are seeking most is this nebulous thing called connection. But the problem is, what is connection? And after conducting nearly 250 episodes on my podcast and after reading lots of books, the common theme throughout all of them has been this idea called connection, except the only problem is, generally speaking in books, connection is about connecting with your spouse, connecting with your children, maybe connecting with your colleagues at work. But none has really looked at the 4 ways. There are my fingers 4. In addition to, by the way, the sun is just completely leaning into my face for some reason at this angle. I don't know why. But the 4 ways we connect. And the 4 ways are that we connect with ourselves first. We connect rippling out words like almost like concentric circles, like with others, could be friends, could be our significant others, could be our children, could be our colleagues. And rippling out even further is the world. We connect with the world. This could include art. This could include nature. This could include our jobs themselves, not the people at our jobs, but the work itself. And the 4th is something greater. It could be, for some people, God, but there's some very strong Orthodox atheists who still go to someplace beautiful, like where you're from in Banff, and they could go an hour-ish away and find themselves at Lake Louise and say, wow, and experience awe. And they experience something greater than themselves, even if it's not religious for them, but it is bigger. Or even just the 2 of you and me talking together is bigger than me alone. You and I are going to create something during this conversation that will be bigger than something that you or I individually could create in all likelihood.
Yeah, no, I love that. And we're going to talk about each of these. And I love that: self, other, the world, and then something greater. And I want to dive into each of those and uncover some things for the listeners and myself. I'm really excited to learn from you. Yep. I'm curious, before we talk about the 4 ways to connect, what problems do these solve in the sense? Because I believe one of the common denominators, and I saw you had put this as well in your bio, and I agree, is lack of fulfillment. And I was feeling that way about a year ago. I woke up one day and thought, am I even happy? I don't even know if I'm enjoying the journey. What's going on? And loneliness. And so, can you share a little bit about some of the harmful effects of these problems? And then we can tie it to the
Well, let's
power of
actually even
connection.
dig further deep into what's called the DSM. It's our diagnostic and statistical manual that we use to formulate diagnoses about our patients in the world of mental health. It's the Bible for all of us.
Okay.
That's what we use. So when we look at things like conditions like depression, anxiety, trauma, and psychosis, all of them have elements of disconnection. If we're depressed, we are ruminating about the past and we're not present. If we are anxious, we are ruminating about we're thinking about the possibility of the future. Not necessarily ruminating, but we're worried. We're not here, but we're thinking about what's going to happen. If we're traumatized, we may be disconnected because we're dissociating or in a depersonalized state. These are hallmarks of trauma. And for psychosis, it's a break from reality itself. So we are disconnected. All of these are signs of disconnection. And what would the opposite be? We were talking about happiness and fulfillment, which is the opposite of meh. So you're like, hey, how are you doing? Meh.
Mm-hmm.
It means that I'm not really here to some extent. But if you said, hey,
Yeah.
I am really stoked. I'm on this cleanse. I feel so good and so alive. And connection is usually a form of aliveness, vitality, something that tells you that, oh, I've got a charge around this. Like the very first time, and I know I'm talking to a Canadian, but I just sent my son Moving Pictures by Rush, that great album. I know you're not in Toronto, but it still hits hard. He's 19 years old. I was 13 years old when I first heard it a cajillion years ago. And you hear that first sound in Tom Sawyer. And if you're me, or if you're him, or a lot of people, you're just like, something just happened. And that could happen when we bite into some type of food. It could happen when we hear a thought, a philosophical thought. It could be when we're meeting somebody for coffee for the first time and saying, my gosh, you're my long lost twin. Where have you been? And there's no need to force it. It could be for the animal people when they're with a particular animal. You mentioned my Labradoodle, and another little nod to Canada, because I believe Labrador is in Canada, but at least half of him comes from there. But I think of me as a convert from hating cats to loving cats. I used to just absolutely abhor them. And the first time I met a cat I fell in love with and ended up adopting changed my life. And there was no faking it. And many of us go into professions and we believe we should be doing this thing. I should be a doctor, but I don't really like being it. I'm good at it, but I don't love it. I don't know if you ever heard of the 4 circles of Ikigai. This Japanese model is fantastic.
No.
It's really good predictor of whether or not you're in the right profession. And it's also a sign of aliveness. These 4 overlapping circles in a kind of a Venn diagram. They are what you love, what you're good at, what will pay, and what the world needs. And if you've got that center of that yummy, creamy center of those 4 circles, bang, you've landed, you're alive, you're connected. Many of us are good at what we do, it'll pay, and it's what the world needs, but we don't love it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I actually have heard about that before, and I love that. And I'm curious as you're speaking, and thanks for explaining that, because you explain it so well and very relatable as well. How does somebody know that they're in a space of disconnection, or that's what's missing from
I
their
would call it a
fulfillment?
limp handshake in life. If you feel like your life is a limp handshake, something needs a little bit of attending to.
Awesome.
I don't mean to laugh about something if it's like legitimate depression. Some people, or if it's that, go seek help. You're no hero to anyone if you just try to rough it alone. We humans need other people. That whole Barbara Streisand song of people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. I would change the lyric. I would say people who know they need people are the luckiest people in the world. We all need people. And oftentimes we need a little bit of just, let's call it, what do they call it in racing? When you need to go get your wheels changed, what do they call that?
Alignment?
realignment, or
Realignment?
it's
I don't
like,
know.
I forget what they call it in F1 racing when you need to pull, or NASCAR when you need to pull over to the side and get your stuff checked. But we need that in life sometimes. That thing, I'm forgetting what it's called. It will come to me later at the least appropriate time. But we all need a little bit of help. And sometimes if we're feeling a little bit meh, we're feeling like a limp handshake, we're not feeling vital, we may need to get our stuff checked out. Or it may just be a consequence of, wow, you know what? I'm dating the wrong person. I'm dating this person based on hope. I hope that they will change, but they don't change. Or it could be, I'm at this job. I thought I'd love this job, but actually I hate this job. It's not what I want to be doing with my life. Generally speaking, there will be some form of inconvenience. We don't like getting off our horses when they're moving, but sometimes we have to actually stop the horse. Oh, I was looking for the word pit stop. Sometimes we need a pit stop.
There you go.
I mean, how well would we do if we had to pee really badly and we didn't take care of that? We generally take care of that. Otherwise, we're going to have some pretty serious bladder health problems. No different for our mental health. Sometimes we need a pit stop in that way as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's so important to push pause and take a time out and reassess. And so I like the example of a limp handshake. If you're feeling like that might be a sign to just be willing to check in with you. And so let's look at some of these, or not some of them, let's look at all of them, the 4 ways of connection. So let's talk about self first, because I think that one to me is so important that I think a lot of people don't even consider. And I've done a lot of personal development, so it's really normal language to say a relationship with myself, or how's my relationship with me doing, or to check in with that. Yet I'm curious, when it comes to yourself, when you speak of relationship with self, can you explain what that even means in the first place for people listening?
Even Shakespeare talked about it. The ancient Greeks talked about it, but unto thine own self be true. I hope I'm saying it correctly. I'm not a literature major, but it's at the nucleus of the 4 connections, because it's the connection from which all other connections stem. If I'm a limp handshake and I am viewing something like beautiful and I'm just really not in a good space, I will not see it quite the same way. If I heard Tom Sawyer being played for the very first time, it might actually activate me and it might get me very excited, but that would be also, we all have different needs for how we connect. So let's just use my father and me as an example. I absolutely adore my dad. He's a great guy and he is obsessed with the opera. He could go to a 6-hour Wagnerian opera and be riveted. You put me in that space and that's an expensive place for me to sleep. Not a way that I'm going to be connecting with myself. If I sat there, I would be miserable. And that's why we all have different connection formulas, as I call them. Your connection formula and mine probably have a lot of overlap, but I promise you there's somewhere where your connection formula and mine are different. I'm madly in love with my wife and I come alive at around 9 p.m. It's like, well, let's talk. And she is more of a kind of like, I'm cycling down, sweetie. Indoor voice, please. I'm trying to get ready for sleep. I'm like, but let's talk about stuff. It's so exciting. She is more introverted than I. And I've learned about the beauties of introversion, but her, as similar as she and I are in certain ways, there are some differences. So all 8 billion of us on the planet have different connection formulas. I could not go a day without touching my animals. My dad, the opera guy, could go 5 lifetimes without touching an animal. He does not care about pets. Those are not important to him, but his opera, oh my God, for sure. We need to be authentic with ourselves. Oftentimes we think, oh my God, I should like this. And I'm going to this lecture because I believe it's important. And I just feel like sleeping and looking at my phone the entire time. But if you go to a lecture that you love with a topic that really matters to you, you're going to be riveted. If you see a comedian who you love versus somebody who you're told you should love, it's a total mess if we aren't actually authentic with who we are. We're actually weaker. There have been some studies that seem to indicate that if we say something that is true about ourselves, we can actually exert more physical energy in that moment than we would if we said something that was false about ourselves. Rather interesting.
So interesting. So I guess as you're speaking, I'm thinking, how does one start to learn and understand what their unique connection formula would be? Is it just having awareness throughout the day with what your decisions cause you to feel? Or like, how do we start to uncover our unique
True.
connection
And
formula?
tonight's garbage night. I'm not going to be connected as I take out the garbage. I can guarantee you that. There are things that we have to do that do not feel particularly connective. Waking up in the morning is hard for me. I don't like it. I do not feel connected at those moments. No one is connected throughout the day fully. The question is, do we have activities in our lives that truly feed us? And the word feed has been used as an acronym in my book. All 4 letters of the word feed, F-E-E-D, are based on real hard research. So let's say I'm a guy who is a psychologist, because I am, and I really need to garden. In fact, this actually happened with one of my clients in the book. I describe him as a PhD in biology who smoked a lot of weed at night and watched reruns of 70s TV. And he felt really, really unfulfilled. He felt like a limp handshake in the form of, he said he had the dad bod of dad bods. And I asked him, let's take a look at the feed model and see if there's something that's right for you. And so the feed model is, does it provide you with flow? Flow is this incredible experience of immersion. It's when you're doing something for 3 hours, but it feels like only 30 minutes have passed by. You're in the zone. Like, oh my God, 3 hours. What happened? It's challenging and it's important to you. The second one, and that comes from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Some of you may have read the book by him, just called Flow. He was a University of Chicago professor and died as a Claremont Graduate School professor. Great guy. The second one is the first E, and that is energize. Does it require energy from you, and does it give you energy back? Anybody who goes on long distance cycling will tell you, yeah, I experienced lactic acid while I was on that ride, and boy, did it take a lot of energy. My thighs are burning. And when you get in the car and strap that bike to the car rack, you're just like, let's go. I'm feeling amazing. So it took energy and it gave energy back. And in this case, you'll hear that this biologist who took up gardening had this as well. The third is, does it educate? I actually wanted to use the word edify. My editor said it's a big word. Use educate. So educate is fine. Does it move the needle and cause you to learn something that you actually want to learn more about? And the last is depth. Does it provide you with a sense of meaning? Is it meaningful in and of itself to you? And for some people, gardening would not be meaningful to him. Gardening was deeply meaningful, so much so that when he examined the feed model and decided to maybe hit the bong maybe twice a week for his weed, and instead he started reading up on gardening, and he woke up early, way before work, got out with barely any sun, and he was working on his garden. And he experienced flow. He experienced energy. It did take a lot of energy. He sometimes had to carry a lot of things. He sometimes had to dig. Was it educational? Oh my God, yes. And was it meaningful? Did it provide depth? Absolutely. It met all 4 criteria. In fact, he started going to the gym so that he'd be a stronger gardener. And he was just reading everything he possibly could instead of watching 70s TV. And he'd invite people over to enjoy his beautiful garden and have barbecues. So he was really, really far more fulfilled as a gardening person rather than a guy just sitting and wasting away, smoking weed and watching 70s TV. And the feed model was what really did the trick for him.
I like that. Feed, flow, energize, educate, depth. And I love that you use the example of riding a bike, because I just did a 150-kilometer bike ride for cancer, and
Congratulations.
That way you shared. Yeah, I relate to your analogy. So that's awesome. And as you're speaking, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so makes a lot of sense. That's a great model to go off of when you're like, if I'm thinking of myself going throughout my day with some awareness to ask myself these questions, right? The power of the questions we ask ourselves is the power of the life that we're going to
Definitely.
have. And I'm also, yeah, and I'm thinking, and what I would like to know, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking this could be really great when it comes to if we move into the other people space, and we might float in and out of the four. Yeah, I'm thinking with others, and I'm thinking about myself, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate. How many times do I say yes to people and then I regret it? And then I'm like, oh, I didn't want to go do that. I don't want to go there. I don't want to. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, when it about the power of connection, that there is a disconnection when I'm not being authentic to the things that I'm saying yes to. And so, how can we be in relationship with other people in this context of protecting our time, effort, energy, what we say yes to, and still have thriving relationships where we're participating in
I
that
love that you asked that
relationship?
question. It's either a hell yes or it's a hell no. And if you say yes to something that's really a
Mm.
no, you experience what I call a consent and resent experience. You say yes, and then you
Mm.
resent yourself for having done it, and you resent the other person quite possibly for the invitation in and of itself. And the other person was just saying, "Do you want to do this thing?" And you really don't want to, but you want to be nice, or you think you should, or blah 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 blah. And the ability to say no, sometimes the biggest no, I'm sorry, I'll say it again. Sometimes the biggest yes you can give yourself is a no to someone else. And for people pleasers
Mm.
like you and me, I can tell you are probably a recovering people pleaser. I know I am. It's very hard because we're nice people. So we want to say yes. And I
Hmm.
was just reading something really hilarious about this kind of fake dialogue. This person inviting somebody to come over to a party, and it's on Friday night, and they say, "I'm sorry, I'm already in my pajamas." And they say, "But today is Monday. It's not even Friday." He said, "Yes." So
That's awesome.
it's
Yeah,
still a
no.
no. So the ability to do this is really crucial for us to know thyself and have those boundaries. Sometimes you got to go. Sometimes your friend might be in a tough place and they want you to go bowling, and you really don't want to go bowling that night, but your friend's in a tough place and you just do it. But if you do that all the
Hmm.
time, you will experience some kind of compassion fatigue and that consent and resent experience. We need to be able to say, you know what, tonight I'm going to be in my fuzzy slippers and watching something really, really stupid and eating something delicious. Sometimes we need to do that for ourselves. But yeah, the capacity to say no is really hard for us, but our bodies are listening. And the more we give in and don't represent ourselves, the greater the likelihood is that we will have a compromised immune system, that our backs will give out. It's almost like our bodies will say, "Hey, if you're not going to take care of us, we're going on strike. So screw you." So that's one of the things that I really work with recovering people pleasers, is to say, "Hey, is this real for you? Is this right for you?"
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I like how you shared it actually starts to show up physically and in your health as well if you don't break that pattern or break that cycle. I'm curious because as you're talking, I also have almost a flip side of the question I just asked, like, how do you choose to say no? So my question is because a lot of my audience are entrepreneurs, right? Or goal setters or just big dreamers. And as we know, when we're going after things that we desire, there's usually a space where you hit fear and there's obstacles and you got to overcome them to get to the other side. And so when it comes to connection, whether it's maybe with others, like going, oh, I don't know why it's
Oh, I
doing
think
that.
I think I gave a thumbs up.
Hilarious.
So for those of you who are just listening, a massive fireworks display just went on over Kelley's head. And that was fantastic. I think it was this.
Oh, it was good timing. And it was when I talked about connection to others. So it was giving me a firework. Do you do it? Yeah. So here's my question. When you're going after big goals and big dreams, right? How do you know the difference? And going with your feed analogy as well. So I could be looking at it being like, okay, let's check in with all the feeds. They're all in check. But for some reason, I'm feeling fear. I'm feeling hesitant. I don't want to do it. So how do we know the difference between fear and it's going to serve us to move through it versus, oh, it's not aligned?
It
Does that
does.
question
And
make
I think it
sense?
really is so variable. It comes back again to know thyself. Like you can ask yourself, gosh, what's compelling me to say yes here? So I don't know that I can answer what it is in each person, but I can say that, to your point, the quality of our questions does inform the quality of our lives. And the way you said it was a little different. But if we can ask ourselves, what would be good about going What would be bad about going? What would be good about saying no to this? What would be bad about saying no to this? What is my truth at this moment? Because sometimes we're actually really uncomfortable with our truths, because sometimes our truths have been blocked by the messages of others from our lives saying, oh my gosh, you should always say yes. And it's really, really crucial that we learn the skill of checking in with ourselves and being willing to say no. So I'm not sure that I have the perfect answer for what to do for all people, but the questions that we ask are akin to a Google search in our brain. And just by asking these seemingly simple questions, what would be good about going? What would be bad about going? What would be good about not going? What would be bad about not going? Those 4 questions. And maybe the 5th is the final punch of what is my truth? That would be probably the sequence I would recommend, at least for starters. There's so many ways to do this, but that would be my recommendation at the moment.
No, I love it. And I just had somebody on the podcast the other day, a mentor of mine, and we were talking about trusting our inner voice and our intuition. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say too, is asking yourself those questions and just lean into practicing, trusting what comes up for ourselves. It might not always be the right decision, right? And you don't know that until you
And the
make
funny
one.
thing is your body's always listening. Sometimes it is just fear that's getting in the way. And it's like, my gosh, I feel like an imposter. Imposter syndrome is a really common one. If I go, I'll be found out that I'm just, blah, 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 that everybody told me I was in 7th grade when I was in PE trying to do this sport that I had no business doing, except I had every bit of business doing. They were just haters and I believed them. And oftentimes people with imposter syndrome are actually really good at the thing. It's oftentimes the people with no imposter syndrome whatsoever that are not as good. But oftentimes it's just anxiety. And if it's just that, and it's an opportunity for a really cool, maybe scary experience, we generally regret the things we don't do more than the things that we do. And that's true on our deathbed. But if it's a small event and you want to take a chance, I say go for it. And worst case scenario, if it's a belly flop, you've got a great story to tell your friends. Oh my God, you're not going to believe this. I just went to this thing and like all of my childhood fears showed up and the thing itself sucked. And you can make it into something funny.
Yeah, no, so true. I love how you brought up imposter syndrome, because I have a question for more related to entrepreneurships, leaders, high achievers. And I think with those types of people I just mentioned, imposter syndrome can be there. And so my question when it comes to connecting with others, so what are the biggest obstacles preventing people of those natures to form authentic connections in today's society, especially because it's so fast paced, it's digital, all of those things? So what do you see are some of the common obstacles, and then how do we break through those?
Yeah, and are you talking about interpersonal or in terms of connecting with ourselves? Okay,
connecting
so probably
with others.
one of the biggest is this idea that social media is enough. I hit like on their post. Shouldn't that make quota? Or I sent them a text and told them I was thinking about you. Isn't that enough? And for some people it is. But for most of us, there is a hierarchy of connection. The lowest bar, I would say, is the social media thumbs up. Up a rung from that would be texting. Up a rung from that would be the email. Up a rung from that would be phone call, which is actually a pretty good one. Up a rung from that would be a Zoom call, although many people are like, no, don't put me on another Zoom call. I do those all day at work. Personally, I actually like them, even though I do them very often at work, just because if I'm seeing my buddy Jed out in New Jersey, like see him soon, I get much more information. I see his face. I get much more nonverbal information than I would on the phone, which is only sonic nonverbal information. But when I see him on Zoom, and the fact is he's busy, he's got a family, I'm busy, I got a family. I came to realize I'm only going to see this guy only so many times in this lifetime moving forward, which is really sad. So I am the big proponent of leaning into Zoom and connecting through that. And then the in-person meet, so important. The only problem is we have so many competing things. Who has time for that? I have a busy life, blah, blah, blah. And I would say it's not optional. We need that in-person stuff, and we need it at different schedules. Some people need it less frequently. My friend and colleague, brilliantly, Britt Frank, she's a therapist out in the Midwest, and she's written great books. Britt Frank talks about the fact that she's not someone who needs to see people very frequently. She said that there are two types of friends on average. Some of us are more canine and similar to dogs, need to feed. Oh, sorry, not canine. It's hummingbirds. Hummingbirds need to feed all the time. I don't know if you have a hummingbird feeder out there, but they need to feed a lot. Their wings are flapping at 60 times per second. They need a lot of glucose. They need a lot of feeding. Some friends, like Joey Tribbiani from Friends, he was always he was always in the fray. And then there were friends like Ross on the TV show Friends, he was in there sometimes. He would be more of what she would call a scorpion. That, not that he was poisonous, but scorpions apparently don't eat all that frequently. They're perfectly sated in terms of their appetites when they feed intermittently. Whereas some people just need to hang all the time. They need that regularly. And I guess I would ask you, who are you? But that brings on another problem. And that is, many of us have moved multiple times throughout our lives. We were born in a place, we went to high school in a place, we went to college in another place, we had our first job in a place, and then we went to graduate school somewhere else, and then we settled down in an entirely other place. And we said goodbye to our friends in each place saying, oh my God, we'll stay in touch. And we don't, because again, we got too busy. And there is an epidemic, at least in the United States, I'm guessing in Canada as well, of loneliness. And loneliness is apparently as detrimental to our health as smoking cigarettes. It can be more predictive of mortality than a host of different cardiological reads, including things like our lipid count or cholesterol. If you look at what loneliness can do to a human, it's really, really bad. Very different, by the way, from solitude. Solitude is great. We would choose solitude. I want to go on a hike by myself and commune with nature. Great. But I'm not lonely when I do that. As opposed to loneliness is, oh my God, I just really feel so alone. And some people feel that while they're in the wrong relationship. Many of us do. Many of us would even say that we feel more lonely in relationship than we would if we had been alone. I would really strongly urge people to make sure that they know their feeding schedules and that they are mindful to attend to those.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I'm curious, just to chat a little bit more, one last question around other people and connection. What would you just say simply are 3 tips that somebody, if they're wanting to improve their connections with others, they could implement? Or just three tips for somebody wanting to foster better connection with other people? I guess I'd
ask you, are you an activity person? Do you want to hang out with people in an activity? And do you need people who are your buddies, or are you perfectly okay going to spin class and not necessarily knowing anybody there? But I would recommend that you figure out, like, what are the ways that you feel most connected? And before I even get into what are some of the ways, I'm going to give you the diagnostic to apply. I call it the drive-away test. For example, let's say that you're meeting with a friend who is really into talking about themselves and has absolutely no interest whatsoever in hearing about your life. You're being talked at, and every time you try to share something, say, oh my God, me too, and let me tell you about me. And enough about me, what do you think about me? To borrow from an old, I think it was from like a 1980s movie.
Right. And then people
you get in your car and you drive away and you feel, oh my God, depleted. That sigh, you feel a few inches shorter, versus when you get together with somebody who's just like you guys, the two of you together have that lovely upload and download. There's a back and forth, and they are not just interesting, but they're interested in you. And they show that. There was a quote from Winnicott, a great British psychoanalyst, who said something like this. He said, psychological health can be demonstrated when you are able to share of yourself and take in the experience of another. And I think that's a really good point. So the drive-away test is, I feel a few inches taller. Oh my gosh, what a good use of time. I'm so glad I hung out with that person, or I did that thing. Maybe it would be the spin class. with other people. And I actually don't really need to talk to anybody. I just like being around people in that way. Some people go to cafes and do their studies or writing their book. They need to be around just the rush, the vibe of people, but they don't necessarily need to interact with them. So we all have different needs around this kind of socialization, and no one is wrong. Everybody just needs to listen to their style.
Yeah.
Some of us really need to be part of a cause or a community. Listen to that. And how often? I know a couple, they're in their golden years, and one of the people in the couple wants to move to a seniors living center because of the enforced socialization, and the other is an introvert, and it would be hell. And what they've negotiated is finding ways to have like breakfast club, dinner club, book club, things like that. I am a member of a book club, and I do find that generally very fulfilling to be able to read a book, have a thoughtful discussion with really cool people about the book. For me, that's a really good way for me to connect. So I guess I would ask, where do you come most alive within that? Some people find that in the church. Some people find that by going to live music events or sports events and high-fiving each other at the sports events. No choice is wrong. The question is the drive-away test. How do you feel as you're leaving?
I love that. I love the drive away test. I can even think of examples in myself that I feel energized versus depleted. So that's a real simple way to have awareness, right, around what brings us energy around connection. And we won't talk about this for sake of time. Yeah, I think we could probably do a whole podcast, as you were speaking there, around marriages and relationships, and how do you have a thriving relationship when you have different connection styles, and what brings you that connection, because that's just a whole can of worms we won't get into right now. But I think that a lot of people could benefit from that conversation, right? Because I'm sure it causes some issues in relationships. Yet I think, once again, it starts with awareness. And so I want to get to a few questions I have. Yet before we do, I just want you to, if you can, because I know we've got to wrap up on time here, can you just the last two ones, the world around them, right? The way to connect that way, and then something greater spiritually. Can you just touch on both of those just a little bit more about the power of connection within those two spaces?
So many of us really need to get out there. It could be like my son has become like this avid hiker. He just comes alive. He wants an adventure. He wants to hike. And that's his way of connecting with the world. All of us have different ways of connecting with, whether it's nature, whether it's art. Some people would rather walk on a bed of nails than walk through an art museum, and that's totally legitimate. And others come most alive when they see artwork of known or unknown artists. And the important thing is to be real with yourself when you're connecting with any of these external stimuli, and not to say, I should like this. But if you find yourself not liking something and you're in there anyway, you could ask yourself, what could I learn from this? Leonardo da Vinci was so curious. Curiosità was the word in Italian. He was so curious that he was even curious about things he wasn't curious about. And Alec Trebek, another great Canadian, I haven't mentioned Robin Shabosky from How I Met Your Mother yet, but boy, love me some Kobe Smulders. She was great in that show. And you could tell I'm really, funny. I love Our Neighbor to the North, and I can't help it. But Alec Trebek, for those not familiar, he was the host on Jeopardy, and he told one of my favorite podcast guests and now friend, AJ Jacobs, that he's curious about things that he's not even interested in. And one of my great guests said he makes it a point to go out once a week to an outing. He lives in New York City, so there are all kinds of opportunities. He goes on an outing once a week to something that he has no interest in whatsoever, because something might be a shocking gem, and he has found gems in doing that. And that makes me just so happy, just the idea of being willing to do that.
I love that. What a special way to, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And so put yourself in scenarios where you may discover something glorious and magical that can add to your life. So I think that's amazing advice.
Oh, and something
And
greater.
then,
Sorry. And
okay,
something greater could be
lastly,
really, it could
oh,
be,
yeah.
it could be meditation. It could be going to yoga. It could be fostering a greater love of nature and being willing to quiet that little part in your brain that says, I shouldn't be so excited. I need to curb my enthusiasm because that's what Larry David does. As opposed to that, there was a great rabbi by the name of Abraham Joshua Heschel who said, we can be radically amazed. So the sunset that's actually hitting me right now is unlike any sunset before and any sunset that will ever happen again. And if we're able to take in a moment, even if we're complete atheists, and say, this is a moment that will never happen again, I'm going to take it in. There's a great line from Jack Johnson. I want to be where the talk of the town is about last night when the sun went down. I like thinking of that song lyric as like, wow, everybody was just standing out there in Maui is how I imagine it. There's this particular place in Maui where everybody just watches the sun go into the ocean and everybody's tripping in such a good way. So that's one of that could be connecting with something greater.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so Adam, where can people find you? So if they want to discover more about this power of connection, read your book, where can they get your book? So share with my audience, where can they get your book from and where can
Absolutely.
people
My
find
book
you?
is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And people can find me at my website, dradamdorsay.com. It's DradamDorsay, dradamdorsay.com. And it will have all the info on me, as well as the fact that I do a lot of keynotes. So if any companies want keynotes or trainings, I'm always down to talk about that. Hit me up on LinkedIn, of course. I have a very small presence on Instagram, but I would say LinkedIn would be a better place to find me in that way. And I do respond to emails. And if people want to buy my book and would like to have it inscribed long distance, one of the things I've done is if somebody sends a picture of the book in some place that they are in their garden, maybe overlooking Lake Louise, and they send me their mailing address, I will send them a decal with a personalized inscription.
Oh, I love that. Speaking of the power of connection, right? That's special. So everybody go and get Adam's book, Super Psyched, Unleash the Power of the 4 Types of Connection and Live the Life You Love. Adam, do you have any last words that you want to share before we hop off?
It has been a total blast being with you, Kelley. Just loved every second of it. You're such a cool person.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here today and for your time and for your message and for putting it out there and changing lives, right? Through your book, through your podcast, through your TED Talks, and through what you do and through who you are. So thank you so much for being you.
Hi, I'm Tanya and this is Julie, and we are the founders of Coach Core, your all-in-one solution for building and scaling a successful coaching business.
At Coach Core, we provide you with everything you need in one place. You can house your courses, manage memberships, run email campaigns, and create stunning websites and funnels, all with our easy-to-use platform.
And it's not just about the software. We offer built-in coaching and mentorship, helping you implement best practices from certified NLP practitioners and story brand coaches. And that's just scratching the surface of what's inside.
And that's why we're excited to sponsor the Entrepreneurial Elevation podcast with Kelley Beveridge. Kelley is a thought leader who inspires and elevates entrepreneurs worldwide.
We believe in the power of community and continuous learning, and this podcast is a fantastic resource for any coach looking to truly grow their practice.
So join us on this journey. Tune into the Entrepreneurial Elevation podcast for insights and inspiration, and visit Coach Core to transform your coaching business today.
Coach Core, your path to coaching success.